Okay, welcome everybody to the second Teaching Writing to the International Student Workshop. Thanks for joining us this afternoon. Today's topic is globalizing the prompt, and we're going to be talking about strategies for making writing prompts more accessible for international students, because we don't want the prompt to be a barrier to their success. As Zephra told me, we should not think of the prompt as a test of their English skills, right? So we want to make the prompt as accessible as possible. And this particular topic came about because we were having lots of conversations about how to teach writing better to our international students. And Zephra, in particular, who works in the Academic Support Center, works with students on writing all the time and sees a lot of prompts and sort of notices how students struggle with these. And so we had this great idea, like, oh, we could actually think about the prompt as something that can be made accessible both through language stuff and through design. And so we partnered up with both language experts, which is what Zephra and Amy do, and writing pedagogy experts, which is what I do, to come up with the topic for this workshop. To help you, if you're online, hopefully you can see in the chat bar, there is a link to a Google Drive. You're going to want to go ahead and open that. There are some sample prompts in there. You'll see one says before and one says after. And we're going to be talking about those, and you'll want to be able to reference them. If you're here in the room, there's handouts, so we can hand those out. Just to give you some disclosure, this is one of my prompts, actually, that Zephra and Amy helped me rework, so that you can sort of see how even someone who thinks about writing prompts all the time maybe doesn't think about writing prompts from the perspective of an international student, right? Because I'm not thinking about things like idiomatic language because it seems sort of natural to me, right? So we are going to go over some language things, like word level things you can change to make these prompts more accessible. We're also going to go over sentence structure things, and then we'll talk about just document design kind of stuff to make it more accessible. Once we do that, we're actually going to go into breakout sessions. Those of you who are online, we're actually going to put you in a breakout room, so you'll get a partner. The key thing is once we put you in a room, you should see a thing that says join. You want to click that. And you'll probably want to unmute your mic or use the chat box so you can talk to your partner. At that point, we'll have you share the prompt you're supposed to bring to the workshop, although if you didn't bring one, we've got you covered, and there is a sample prompt to work with in that folder. Those of you who are in the room, we have a sample prompt in case you didn't bring one of your own. And you'll do some sharing. If you're online, what you'll do is share, you can pull it up in your computer and actually share your screen with your partner. If you struggle to do that, we made that Google folder open to everyone, so you can also drop your file directly into the Google folder and your partner can retrieve it, okay? And then we'll call you back from those breakout rooms, so we've got that end handled. All right, sound good? Those of you who are online, hopefully?
Yes. Yes.
All right, so I'm going to go ahead and share my screen so you can see what we're doing. So hi, if you don't know me, I think you guys know me. I'm Amy Mecklenburg-Faenger, the Director of Park Rights. Joining me today is Amy Jenkins, who's going to come stand in front of the camera, who's the Director of the English Language and Culture Institute, and Zephra Weber, who is an ESL specialist in the Academic Support Center. And we're going to talk about how to make your prompts more accessible. So I'm going to hand it over to Amy first. We want to, there we go.
Perfect. So the first thing we're going to talk about is idiomatic language. And in the sample prompt, the before one that you have, we pulled things out of there that we needed to revise and to improve upon. And Amy was nice enough to let us use one of her prompts to kind of play with and see if we could make it more accessible for our language learners or non-native speakers. So the first thing we're going to look at are some of the idiomatic language pieces that were in that prompt. And the reason this is a barrier is that it can be confusing or misleading for students. Idioms oftentimes are a little bit challenging because we have, as native speakers, kind of an innate understanding of what those words together mean. But non-native speakers struggle with trying to unpack the context around those things. They tend to be more literal, and so they'll take each word very literally, and that doesn't always work for an idiom. So that's one of the reasons it's a barrier. So the solution to avoid that language is to replace some of those phrasal verbs with their single word counterparts, or to find a more direct or straightforward way to be able to say that same thing.
I feel stupid. What's a phrasal verb?
Yeah, so phrasal verbs are, it's a phrase and there's a verb in there. So an example of a phrasal verb is look over something.
Ooh.
The easier way to say look over something is to say review it. Yeah. So we say these things all the time in our natural language. Oh, just look over it. But a student is saying, look over, what am I looking over? They're thinking physically looking over something maybe, or trying to like realize what is that referring to. Whereas if you just say review the paper or whatever you're asking them to, then it's more direct. So we'll go through a couple of examples here that we pulled out of the before prompt. So our first example is don't wait until the last minute to lay your hands on the text. So this
It's a twofer.
is
So many phrasal verbs.
really slow a kid down. Okay? It's like, what? Don't wait until the last minute. Which minute are we talking about?
What religion is this?
Yeah,
Hands on
supposed to get my hands on something. I'm looking for.
The whole paper about the feeling of this.
Yeah. So it could be, challenging. So the revision, better way to say this, is to say select and have your own copy of the text 2 weeks before the project is due. So it's just a little bit cleaner way of saying it. So we're going to look at another example from the text. So keep the page limit in mind. So what is the idiomatic language in this example?
In mind?
Yeah, so keeping, the page limit in mind, that's where our idiomatic language is. So the revision is remember the 7 to 9 typed page limit. So just being a lot more exact. I put even the 7 to 9 typed because that's in the later you'll see that that's the exact criteria. And so oftentimes if there's a little repetition of certain things, that's helpful too. But you could just say remember the page limit. So the next example we have is rather than provide a laundry list, your summary should demonstrate how these ideas fit together. So where is the idiomatic language or phrasal verbs here?
Well, laundry list. And then wouldn't also ideas fitting together be?
Yep. Yeah, those are the two that we can certainly unpack for students and revise. Yep. So the revision might look something like, do not write a list of ideas. Your summary should demonstrate how the ideas are related or connected to the topic. So there we go. So when you revise for clarity, these are some other examples, or some of the examples in there. Get something across, you could say communicate or convey instead. So these are just easier ways of cleaning up our prompts to make them more accessible. All right. So now I'm going to turn it over to Zephra, and she's going to talk about sentence structure level. You're welcome.
Hello. And if it's new for you, like Laura was saying, you're thinking about this kind of language, I think that was a really good question. Because that kind of terminology, in the ESL world, we're really used to. But when you're starting to reflect on your own language, it's hard to kind of hold on to maybe, okay, idiomatic, where does that stop and end? And for me, I think it's helpful to think, if you have words separately and they have one meaning, and you combine them and they have a completely different meaning, then that's one way to sort of hold on to that idea that you're combining several words and they have a completely different meaning than when you see them by themselves. So that's one way to figure that out. So when I was doing research and learning about teaching English as a second language, I was blown away by what takes place in the reading process. And I think to reflect on that a little bit before we talk about sentence structure is a really good idea, because for me, it's mind-blowing what we can do when we read. And maybe that's why we have to teach children to read, and it's not, it's not something that just happens. It's an incredibly complex and interactive process. It involves working memory, long-term memory, cognitive strategies, metacognitive controls that supervise the cognitive strategies. And then we also think about it in lower level decoding takes place, and that is word recognition, recognize the word, find its meaning in memory, and then just silently activate its pronunciation. All those things are happening. And recognizing syntactic structures, which is what we're going to be focusing on now. And then higher level comprehension skills, understanding sentences and discourse, building a discourse structure, and integrating this knowledge with what one already knows. So the only way this all works is that a lot of things become automatized, so you're doing things automatically. So if you can silently activate the pronunciation in your head instantly, then it takes the workload down. But that will slow you down, so I think it really helps to think about that. The more, for example, complexity we add in, the more work a person has to do when they're reading. And I think incredibly that native speakers can process reading up to 300 words per minute, which is just incredible. So when you're reading in a second language, a lot of that slowed down by lower level decoding, or the higher level comprehension skills can be a lot harder. So that is important to remember when you're looking at these prompts, that these learners are still building their skills, so they're not able to read and to process as quickly or as automatically as we do. So for sentence structure, the things that I find and that are proven to be a barrier in reading are long sentences with complex syntax. And we're going to walk you through what that means, because I know that's like, what? What do you mean complex syntax? So it's amazing because you can know every word in a sentence and still not understand it. And I'll have that. I have students that bring a prompt to me and say, I know all these words. I don't know what this means. I don't know. I can't understand this. I don't know what they want me to do. And I have experienced that myself in my language learning. I'm an Italian speaker trying to improve my Italian, and there's some things I'm like, I know these words. Why can't I understand this sentence?
I had that feeling in grad school.
Yeah.
I still remember some of the phrases, like the hermeneutical texture of the communicative praxis. Wow.
That's a perfect example.
Like, I know what all those words mean, but I'm not quite sure I really,
Yeah, and actually that's a really good example, is that when we are reading complex text, I think we all have the experience, we'll read it and then say, wait, what? And so that's even more challenging when you have some of these things going on. And if we can remove some of those barriers and make the instructions easier to understand, so much better, right? So much better for these students. This is one way of looking at prompts. One of the things is complex subjects. And so, when you have teaching English language to international students who have never blah, blah, blah as your subject, that can make it more challenging. Referencing can be difficult, and ellipses were structures that omit words to avoid repetition. And I'm going to show you what that is. Okay, so the important thing when you're looking at your prompt is, in the most important parts of the task, simplify sentences. You can break one complex sentence into several sentences, several smaller ones. Avoid structures that omit words, and use nouns instead of pronouns, even if this means repeating the same noun several times. So as we were working on the prompt together, we were looking at the repetition, and it was a little hard to give that up because it's style, right? So I don't want to say this noun again. It's not good style. But if my reader can easily understand it, it's a compromise worth making, we could argue. So let's look at some of these together and see how you guys do. So here's an example. Can you find a structure there that you think might be challenging?
Hey, this is Glenn. I don't know if you can hear me.
We can.
Say it.
Oh, great. One thing that's going on is there's some weird verb.
Yeah, go for it. Tell me.
Oh, so sorry.
Yeah, there is a weird verb. Which one is it? Do you? Because the thing is, for us as native speakers, this is very easy to unpack because we automatically can figure out what's happening here. What do you think it was, Glenn?
Oh, so there's I guess the gerund of choosing.
Yes, yeah.
But then also the present or the future tense will generate seems to me to be needlessly complex. I mean, you could make this an imperative sentence.
Yeah, you are absolutely straight on, right on. The choosing from one of the options below is a participle clause. And then, Amy and I completely agreed when we were looking at this sentence, we're like, why are we saying generate? What's the purpose of the complexity of that word? So that's perfect. So, what words have been omitted there? Can you figure that one out? If anybody wants to chime in. What does Amy mean from that? We understand, but if I'm not a native speaker, I might see that and think, well, what is that connected to? Because she's omitted something. What is it?
You should?
Yeah.
I mean,
excellent. You should. And then you should what? How would you finish that sentence? You should.
I would say select, but then I'd probably go select might be harder, so I might say pick.
Yes, select is a good choice, I think.
Is it okay?
It's very clear. It's
Select.
very straightforward. You should select. Okay. So, all right. I said you will, but the funny thing with participle clauses is you don't really know what they omitted.
Yeah.
So it's hard to supply it. If it didn't come into your brain and your brain couldn't just put that where it should go, we don't really know what she omitted. She possibly also omitted then you will, right? So,
Oh, sorry. I was going to say there's sort of the timeline is messed up because it's not quite if then, but it's step one, choose, step two, generate.
Exactly. So, and that is important to remember, and it's hard when it's so natural for us to use those, but she has omitted the time adverb and just assumes that you will know that first you choose and then you generate it. Yeah. So,
Like your a dynamo.
yeah, generate. So that is a perfect example of something that we all use a lot because it's more efficient. But then when you're looking at it from a non-native lens, it might be hard to decode that. And so like Glenn said, you've taken out the subject and the auxiliary verb, and the verb moved from the future, or we could say should. I liked that idea. That was really good. To the present participle. So the verb's completely changed form. And then what about you guys? Can you just take a second and jot down how you'd rewrite this sentence? You could completely change it, or you can type it in the chat for those of you participating online. How would you rewrite this?
Don't make me go get it.
Is there a pencil up there?
There's usually there's a pen there too. There's
Amazing.
usually junk hanging around on the lecture.
There you go.
Thank you.
So if you want to put that in the chat, how you would rewrite that.
Someone put something in the chat. I saw
Oh,
it.
yeah, I see it. Okay, cool. Let me,
Gosh, I started to generate.
how come I can't see it? There you go.
I know, now I'm gonna use that word.
Yeah, it sometimes takes several revisions. So Glenn has said, first select one of the options below, then follow the instructions to create a rhetorical advertisement, a rhetorical analysis of an advertisement.
It definitely has order right.
The order is
Right.
correct.
I like it.
Yeah.
And putting it in 2 sentences makes it 2
Yeah.
separate steps, which is easier to follow probably.
Oh, uh-oh. How do I do that now? Yeah. Sorry. Uh-oh, Jamie.
No, you're good.
Where did that chat go, though?
So if you hover near the top.
Yeah, but I did something funny. You might have to come rescue me. I minimized it.
It's okay.
Did you come up with something, Laura?
I said, first, select from the options below, then write a rhetorical analysis of an advertisement.
Yeah, nice.
It's like you're a communication professor.
You can stay.
And let's see, Kathy says pick one. Oh, that's nice of the
Yeah,
option.
pick
The
one.
ordinal number is nice, yeah.
Then create a rhetorical analysis of this advertisement. Good, much clearer. Did you come up with anything that you'd like to share? Yeah.
I don't think mine's is good, but it says, to complete this assignment, you will select one of the examples of an advertisement listed below and then analyze the rhetoric it uses.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's definitely clearer than having
Yeah.
this. Good. Yeah, and you've included some extra, important extra.
I like that you made it 2 sentences, so the first sentence was one direction, the next sentence was the next direction, instead of putting multiple steps in one sentence, just breaking it out.
Absolutely. So let's look at this next one. Can anybody spot the ellipsis, the cutout words? Or maybe the structure that would cause difficulty?
After the comma, it should
Yeah,
be, you have been commissioned by.
very good. Yeah. So commissioned by.
I like this game. I like this game.
It's fun, isn't it?
It's really fun.
We had a
Yeah.
good time.
When Zephra taught me this and we were looking at my own prompt, I noticed stuff so quickly, actually. Once you just start looking for it, you get a
Yeah.
few like structures to look for, you really start to see them
Yeah.
quite readily.
So commission, okay, imagine that you're a freelance science writer commissioned by Dr. Jan Pecknick to write, there my decoding really slowed down, I can't remember what I was reading, to write a research focus box for his textbook. So it's a reduced relative clause, doesn't matter what the name is for you guys, who cares? But you're absolutely right, who has been was omitted, it was probably the who, but how would you rewrite this one? So let's play that game again. If you had a choice, thinking about this non-native speaker who won't be able to get it as easily if they're at a lower level, cutting out these words, what would be a clearer way? What do you think?
It's his turn, or
Yeah.
their turn. I'll answer the last question.
I'll give you a
Glenn
second.
had one up there.
Is Glenn have one up?
Yeah, Glenn
He did
and Kathy,
before.
Kathy and Glenn both gave us their,
Where did it go?
Not for this one.
Oh,
not for this one, they're still
Okay.
working on it.
That's true, Glenn. Yeah. Glenn
Yeah.
says it might be easier to see these isolated, and that is true. Although,
Yeah.
having worked with Zephra for a little while on my prompt, I really did start to see them a little bit better. But granted, I am an English professor, and so I do have some training in thinking about language from a syntactic level, so it might be a little easier for me. But
Yeah,
I think just coming at it going, what structures have I used that might confuse people,
yeah.
really forces you to rethink the sentences.
And that's why we give you a chance now in a few minutes to look at your own, because here we want to isolate so that it's easy to see. Because first we have to know what we're looking for, and hopefully it is fun, because it's fun to realize you can spot them.
Can I ask a question that's
Of
probably
course.
out of order here? Imagine. Will that word cause problems?
Well,
For
so
people-
here's the way to think about it. It 100% depends on level, okay? And then vocabulary, how much vocabulary you have. Now, if you think about your own language learning experiences. I'm a student, I'm reading this, and the first word I hit, I don't know that word. That's totally possible.
Yeah.
Someone doesn't know Imagine. So what do? Now, do
They
you
look
think
it up, probably.
they're gonna look it up? Imagine is a single word. When you look it up, the dictionary definition will be the meaning. The first definition will be that meaning because it's the most common meaning.
Mhm.
And it's an easy word to find in the dictionary. They're probably translating it directly. So they're not
Yeah.
looking at an English definition, they're gonna look at the word in their language, and it will probably be the right word. And that's how you can decide, is this word easy to look up? Okay.
And is this its primary meaning in English? too?
Yes, because you have to remember that
That's
sometimes
important.
it's like the 5th or 6th or 7th meaning, they might get the wrong one. But yeah, that's a great question.
Like a verb like generate, it's a single word, they can look it up, but the first definition of generate is not gonna be
It
this
may not
metaphor for
be
writing
the
or,
create.
creating.
English is super
right?
It's
convenient for
across
them that way.
multiple disciplines. Right, yes. And all languages are like that. All languages have words hold multiple meanings. So it's just thinking about it. Okay, if no one will volunteer, what do they think?
Oh, Kathy's got one.
Oh, good, Kathy, I'll read yours. You are now working as a freelance science writer after completing school. Dr. Jan Picnic has hired you to write a research focus box for his textbook.
That's nice.
Oh, I love it. And you've taken out Imagine,
Yes.
Yeah,
which
Yeah.
actually, why is it there?
yeah.
I mean, do we need it? That's really good. Kathy. Yeah, and if the caps works there, doesn't it?
It does.
You.
Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's keep moving. Well done. Okay. All right, we're going to do a referencing one. So referencing, you can think about it being pronouns if that helps you. It's where one word replaces another word. Okay. So can you spot it here? Where's the referencing or structure that might get tricky?
Sources.
Yes. And which one do you want to say the whole piece there then, Jack, that was challenging maybe?
You must use at least 3 sources in some way, so it's not clear, because source, that's again not, like, that's an academic idiom, right? Like, we know what that means, but
Oh, that's good.
Yeah,
the
you're right.
word
Yeah,
in
that's
practice does not mean that, and then it means in some way.
Oh,
That
yeah.
requires you to know what a source is. So not only does the
Yeah.
word is not clear, it's not clear what you're supposed to do with it, because you're gonna get like some kid that wants to talk about springs or fountains or
Yeah.
something, right?
And it is true, and actually I think it's really important that when you're using academic jargon, maybe we could call it that, but we hopefully will learn what those are pretty soon, because they are very important words. But it maybe is an idea that if this is a word I want them to know, is there a place I could define it for them? In the beginning of my class, do I have a handout of these are important academic words that I'm going to use a lot, and I want you to know what I mean by them? We could do that.
I bet all the students
Don't
don't
get this. And here is what we were thinking of, actually. The one of which.
Which?
Which what? Yeah, you can give them
Yeah.
a choice. Yeah.
So one of which is a little it can be complex to trace. So when you're reading in another language, your brain is working really, really hard. And you'll be amazed that students, so we would call this a pronoun, right? Do you know, what does this stand for? One of what?
One source.
Okay, one of the sources, right?
Yeah.
Mhm.
Okay, one of the sources. So we hold that in our mind and it comes up automatically, but it's very possible that your second language person's reading and they come to that which and they just see which and that it doesn't activate the referent. And I work with learners a lot where I'll check with them. There'll be a this, for example, that I know is important. They have to know what this is or the next sentence makes no sense. Okay, well, what does this mean? No idea. Because they haven't been able to hold it in their memory as they're working. So we said it represents the sources, okay? And how would you rewrite it? If you want to just say it, you can. This one's
Well, you must use at least 3 sources. You must use at least 3 sources, period. One source must be a scholarly peer-reviewed source, or you have located yourself.
Yeah, one of the sources.
Yeah.
Yeah, very good. Okay, just repeat it.
You can just hack that language out.
Hack it out. Just repeat the noun. Okay, and our last one. I would apologize for the example. I was trying to come up with one. I've seen this structure. The structure really is so tricky. Can you spot where the challenge is? I'm gonna throw it out, Glenn or Kathy. So I just created this because I didn't want to use the ones I've seen.
Is it the meddling and impact thing?
No, that would be very hard. Look for referencing, so where words or one word is representing something else.
I don't like the if so, how.
Yeah. Oh, how do I go? Oh, forward, there we go. The if so is where the issue is. Yeah, because what does that actually represent? What does the so refer to?
An affirmative answer to the question.
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
And an affirmative answer to the question, which is actually, the so is, if it is true that Russia's meddling impacted the outcome of the US election, right? So it's a lot. And if you haven't actually learned that structure, because I know what so means, like they've learned so, what does so mean in English, guys?
It's a coordinated compound.
Means because, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Or, and as a result is better, sorry.
You're trying to figure out what are the 2 things that's
Yeah, like what is,
it's connecting if and how, what?
and it's an advanced structure.
Kathy's also trolling you.
I would do, yes, totally, I know, it's so true.
You're doing exactly what you're telling us not to do.
I know, it is omitting words, yes, I know, totally. That is, I am doing what I told you not to do.
You know how I remember this one though? You know the punctuation mark, ellipses, ...
Yeah.
Like when you use it in a quote, you use it to show that you've omitted words from the quote. So that's how I remember that as a grammatical structure.
Yeah, and I have to Google it occasionally when I forget what it meant, which is what happens to me a lot. Oh, I told you how I rewrite it, but if you believe Russia's meddling did have an impact on the outcome, explain how. But yeah, Jack, totally meddling, I mean, that would be the best choice. Okay, so, I'm gonna hand this over, but that's just to give you an idea of those structures. So now Amy's gonna talk to us about design.
So here's the funny thing about working on this with Zephra and Amy is I teach technical writing. And I think it's pretty interesting that in a class where I teach both document design and good instructions, I never once think about how that applies to my prompts, which are in fact a technical document of instructions, right? So I think one of the most striking things for me is to realize I had some of this knowledge, but was not applying it to my prompts because I'm thinking of my prompts more as like a communication with my students, or I want them to catch the flavor, or I want it to sound more interesting and fun. So I think this is why I'm choosing all these colorful verbs and phrases, right? Instead of thinking this as a technical document that needs to give clear instructions. And I feel like once I got that in my head, I was like, oh yeah, okay, I do know some strategies for this. And one of those is good document design. All document design means is that we design documents to make it the easiest to use for a majority of users, right? And there are lots of design techniques that are very simple that you can use to better design a document, right? So if you're online, you can actually look at the before and after that we're going to talk about in your folder. If you're here, you can see the before and after. So this is the same prompt, before and after both working on language issues and then design issues, right? So if you put them side by side, I think you'll see they're fairly different. In particular, if you look at the design, you can see that I've made a number of choices to make the most important information clear. And the interesting thing about how non-native speakers navigate prompts, and believe it or not, there's research on this, is that they typically will get hung up on the first sentence or two. And they will then develop their idea of what you want them to do from that first sentence or two. Native speakers scan the whole thing looking for a directive, right? And you'd be surprised how many prompts I've seen that don't start with anything all that important. In fact, we love to explain lots of context before we even say what we want you to do. So that can trip people up. So one of the things Zephra and I talked about was, how do we get the most important things they need to do closest to the top left of the document, which in most Western cultures is where you're going to read, right? You start reading upper left. So that's an area of emphasis in a document.
I was going to pull it up.
Okay, go ahead.
Because I thought you might have an easier time with it. Where's the after font?
The after.
Okay.
Yeah, so you can sort of see in the upper area, we've got sort of the key information. And in fact, when we were talking about this, Zephra just set my whole prompt aside and she sort of looked me in the eye and said, what do they actually have to do? Like if you just had to give me a list, what are the most important things they have to do to not get this wrong? What are they? And I listed them out and she's like, okay, let's put those at the top, right? So I actually designed the document to have a 2-column layout that allows me to do sort of a pull-out on the left of the most important things. So these are like, if you do these things, you're getting in the ballpark, right? Along with the grading criteria, because those are also quite important to make sure that they hit 7 to 9 pages USMLA style, right? And then the right column is sort of designed to be where all the contextual extra detail information is, right? By the way, you do not have to be super technically sophisticated to do this, right? This is done in Microsoft Word. I used a very simple tool to use this. Microsoft Word actually has templates that will make a sidebar that looks like this. In fact, there's a bunch of different kinds you can choose from. And the cool part is once you make the sidebar, you can actually resize all of these elements. So I actually was able to pull this blue thing up and make it bigger, and I made this text box a little wider. So they're actually editable once they end up on the page, which makes layout a little bit easier. If you're really fancy with technology, though, you can always do something like use InDesign and really make like highly well-designed documents, right? Even in Canvas, you can use some document design elements. It's not as fancy as this, but you certainly can use things like bolding, listing, using some white space, separating things into shorter paragraphs. We call this chunking information in technical writing. And so you can see I've used a number of these tactics when I redesigned. We definitely shortened a lot of the sentences to clarify them, but we also broke the paragraphs into separate paragraphs to make them a little more navigable. And it's helpful also to just label parts of the prompt, right? So that we know sort of what is the purpose of this paragraph of the prompt. Well, this is where I'm going to tell you what the purpose is. So I'm just going to label it purpose, right? And the upside of this is good also for all of your students who aren't always all that great at reading a prompt anyway. I don't know how many of you have had a student like, I didn't notice that was in the prompt, and you're like, you know, better designed documents can help them as well.
Did you read?
The answer is no.
No.
The answer is no.
And I think that's important when Amy and I were talking, is that we all know that there are the students who don't read thoroughly the whole thing, especially if there is such hard work to get through it. So if you have the most important things at the top where they can read it, at least you know they have that.
Yes. And I think this stuff on the side it's like a checklist. Like
It is.
if I'm a student, right, and I'm reviewing my paper before I hand it in to make sure I did everything, it's easy to just check.
And in fact, if we redesigned this, we could actually make them checkboxes. And then we could have them, you know, maybe before they hand it in, check off that they did all
Well, that's how
those
I
things.
Well, that's what you do with students
Right.
in Academic Support Center. Let's highlight what the key things are. Show me where they are in your paper. Well, we already do that here.
Hey, Amy, could you, like if you wanted to use I love this, by the way.
Thank you.
If, you know, like, could you put like a link in there, like for the Dear Reader letter?
Yeah, you totally could.
Or like the rubric or something?
Yeah, so you could link the rubric to it. This is just a Word document, so of course you can paste whatever links you want in here, but if you design something actually like directly in the assignment module in Canvas, of course you have the ability to put links in there as well to other things in Canvas also. So you can link to the rubric, for example, inside Canvas.
Huh.
Yep. And here's kind of the cool thing. I sort of picked a design that reminds me of textbooks, right? You notice how very textbooky this looks? I saw it and was like, oh, that totally looks like the kinds of textbooks I'm using. It has a sidebar, it's a color, right? So it mimics a genre that they're being exposed to in other elements of your course if you're using a textbook, of course. And the cool thing is, I realized once we did this, I was like, oh, I just need to redesign every single assignment for this course to look like this. And now I can have consistency, and they will know from the very first assignment where to look for things, and then they'll get their second assignment and they'll understand it works the same way, right?
Yep.
So you can create this beautiful sort of portfolio of assignments that looks like it was professionally printed. Right?
And you've taken the guesswork out of it for students.
Yeah.
Yes, yeah.
And I will reiterate, this is not, there's nothing super fancy in this document in terms of what I did. Other than putting in that left column, which literally is just a template that you can pull down from one of the design choices. Other than that, the rest of it's pretty simple. It's bolding, adding some bullets here and there. I think the hardest thing was getting the bullets on the left to be the same as on the right, because Word is weird and fiddly about this. But that was really the only challenging thing in terms of like technology, right? But even if you don't want to play with columns, right, you don't have to, right? You can still, even in a one-column document, put the most important stuff at top, label things, use bolding and listing to make a document more navigable, right? So even a simple text document can be easier to navigate. Make sense so far? How do I get back to our...
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so here's what we're going to do now. We are going to do an activity. Okay, so those of you who are online, this is where we're going to make you be in a breakout room. So give us just a second. Jamie's going to put you in a breakout room. What should happen is something should pop up that says join. You guys just need to click that, and you'll probably need to maybe unmute your mics to talk to each other. And you can share your screen with one another. So the goal is for you to share your prompt that you were supposed to bring today with a partner and look through them and think about what specific changes do you see like right now that you could make, right, in terms of word choice, structure, or design. We're going to give you some time to talk about it. Those of you who are online, when we're ready for you to come back, you'll get a notice that says we're coming back in 60 seconds. Sound good? Are there any questions before we do that? All righty. So you two can work together.
You gonna put us into groups?
You were really happy that I got here because now you had a group,
I
right?
feel super smart right now because a lot of this already looks.
Yeah.
Ooh.
That's reaffirming, I think, to
Although-
know that you're making good choices already.
Be
Right?
gentle with the dyslexic kids' grammar.
Yeah, no, don't worry. We're just simplifying.
So what we're like looking for ways in which this can be made to look like this? Is that
Well,
the idea?
I think we're looking with, we've got the three lenses. We've got language, so the idiomatic language.
Okay.
We've got sentence structure.
Toss that away.
And then in the document design will be tricky now, but it's finding the most important parts of the task. Have they been stated clearly?
Oh, Lord.
Systems in Cornelia's office.
Oh, there's Kathy. Okay, now they're in.
Okay, great.
So somebody
they
needs to
are
give us all a Zoom lesson because
Yeah.
I didn't know you could do breakout rooms.
Isn't it cool? We just learned today.
We're lucky to have you together.
I remember helping someone with one of these. I was like, I know, I'm gonna look that up.
I know.
You need that word in this class.
Yeah.
Exegesis?
Yes, because
Yeah.
Yeah, but it's actually
You
a
need
word
it.
that they've
No,
like been
I know.
explained and shown and
No, no,
Yeah.
At this point, this semester.
That would be in their.
The whole lecture of what
definition.
exegesis is.
Yes.
When I start this
Yeah,
semester.
you covered that.
Yeah.
My students in rhetoric were thrilled to learn the term exegetical. They
Exegetical,
like
yeah.
exegetical and hermeneutical.
We're reading
on top of
the prints now, and it's esoteric and exoteric, and they're like,
Mm.
it's blowing their minds. They're like, whoa, wait, this means two things? Yes. You make them feel smart to speak. He thinks the reader's an idiot, but you're smart. You see this.
The assignment.
Kathy says, wow, I love this, Amy. That's to you about your document.
Oh, that it's core. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you
It's not fair. You're getting support.
I know.
You each have your
I'm
own
used to
ESL
doing
specialist.
one-on-ones.
I like this. This is pretty cool. Right. Well, see, that one would just be, the assignment is an exercise. It's meant to, like you can get rid of all that.
You could, and you could even go more direct, the purpose of the assignment,
Yes.
right? That would be a clear and very direct way of saying that.
You want to come in for the end of our workshop on prompts? We're more fun. There's snacks.
And then how would we finish it is,
Well, so you want doing a snack before we go? I have goldfish and
Just two.
Jolly Ranchers and sodas and more.
Well,
Sure, you want snacks? Well, we
skills
carry out
they
here.
need to develop.
and here's some good, this is another one of those, the cutting out elements, which are needed.
Yeah.
Oh,
Oh,
You
yeah.
see what I mean?
Yeah.
7:15, we'll see how these
How
next
is
do.
this assignment is
I do have this set up online, so at the end you'll be able to say, you know, I'm gonna
Okay, like
make it work
well, I don't know.
archives.
strengthen.
Yeah,
Or
because you're
develop.
thinking improve or develop, strengthening is,
I really you guys up to me oriented.
will be fine.
I realized that
Right.
I don't like PDC for the next one.
Skills necessary for the foundation.
The skills you need,
Ah,
right?
Yeah.
It's just that,
Yeah.
yeah.
It's not immediate. Yeah, so it's not really clear what,
Well,
there's no like hierarchy of importance.
So
Thank
the
you.
purpose of
Thank
the
you for your
assignment
time.
is to strengthen the skills you need.
Cool.
That's, yeah.
It's about as
Clear
boiled as I can go.
Yeah.
You, why not say you will instead of students?
Yeah, it's kind of that, it's just very, no confusion, yeah.
That's kind of weird.
Like,
Identify as a country you have chosen and research.
Yeah.
I like
Because
You
there's,
defined it there.
Nice, that's nice.
but I think the word would be previews.
I think that might throw me. I don't know. Would that throw me
We'll
as a
start.
foundation?
I find this hard,
By the way, so you should
even
have
for
the
myself.
Because actually, the preview includes, seems like
This class.
Yeah.
it's a word that refers to something that's already
And
finished.
that's just the.
Right.
Of the,
Sort
of,
Provide an
the-
extra.
Right.
already backwards.
Right, it's just saying begin with
Is
this. Yeah.
that?
Yeah.
I wasn't sure if I ever gave you these.
of the selected,
Whoa.
whoa,
be tricky.
chosen.
The first point in the paper.
Well, I would say text, which is probably, but
Well, we were using
Yeah.
text in the end too, because it's so
Yeah.
impossible.
The first point.
I have 50 things I need to remember to do.
Okay, what about
Time in the next
putting
First.
here? Do you
at
think
the
that
end of
would
the et
help?
cetera.
Yeah,
Yeah.
because you will select,
You will select one example.
then
What-
you will.
The first point in your paper?
Jack, do you provide an exegesis or can you write an exegesis? As far as like, can you write one? It's something you can write, how do you say it?
Exegesis?
Exegesis. Can
It's
you
just
write it?
an explanation or analysis.
Right.
Yeah.
It's
You're
an
just
analysis
analyzing.
of it using to like different, isn't it? What the thing's doing
I need
in
some data.
culture, current culture, and what the background of it was, is that right?
Yeah, the idea is that the purpose of the paper is like they're going to start reading philosophical texts,
Just like online evaluation.
which make most of their points by the way they're organized, not necessarily what they explicitly say. So the point is that to like look at something from pop culture and say, well, how has this been organized? Why is it organized that way? Like, why do the characters relate in this particular way? What does this tell me about the point? Right.
Gotcha.
So their point is to sort of unpack the structure of it.
Right. So
Right.
can we say write an exegesis?
Exegesis? Yeah.
Exegesis. I'm going to say it right by the
Well,
end.
an exegesis is a kind of paper.
So you can write it.
It's
Or
a
provide
thing you
it.
do. It's like an analytical
Right.
technique,
Yeah.
right?
Oh, do it. Oh,
You
I
do
see.
an
That's why you
exegesis.
like
Then
provide.
you will,
Yeah. It's a
It's a
thing.
thing that you do.
Yeah.
will do. Jesus. Of the,
So, of the
At
So it
the
seems
top,
like
like
she's
she's
got,
got
like,
like specific points that she wants them to make.
Uh,
And then she's
items.
got certain, like,
Shape example.
cover. So some
Oh,
of
yeah.
the bullets seem like points that need
Yeah,
to be made.
example you
And then other
selected.
things seem like content that she wants added. And so I think you could almost like
Rely.
right?
Yes, and then use the class material.
Yeah. Otherwise, some people might look
To
at
do
this
what,
and think, oh, I have to have a 6-paragraph essay. Because she's telling me in the first paragraph, make this point, in the second paragraph, make this point.
that's
And
kind
then
of,
I'm supposed to identify this in my fourth, right? But that's not really how she wants this written.
so to
I think
separate.
she wants them to like be able to
Um,
make certain points
Okay.
as their
Use the
persuasive
class
argument.
material.
But the way it's organized maybe is misleading.
In
Yeah,
your
so
analysis.
separating like
To
the
do
content
your analysis.
that has
I
to
think
be
that is
there
what you mean.
from the actual thing
As the
she wants them to
foundation for your
do.
analysis.
Right.
Unless she really
The
does want them to
persuasive
do it in
element.
this order.
Yeah.
We'll have to see, because it's always.
She might actually want them to do it in this order.
Yeah.
Because
Is it-
it seems like you should begin with an
Like what I was
introduction that does
thinking.
this. Then you should make this.
What does this mean to you?
Right,
Okay.
right.
Next, identify
Provide
a
an
country
argument.
with these dimensions and you're persuading people this.
I don't like
then
argument
fourth,
together like that.
I don't know.
But of course, he's repeated it, so at least we
And
know.
then finally,
her
people are like,
perspective
oh,
of the
that's my
single-
conclusion. Unless this is following like her, unless that's how a persuasive appeal structure is, I'm not
Mhm.
sure.
It might be.
Underlying is.
If that is, then maybe
Yeah.
that's
Because it
why
seems
she's
like-
done it
Is there
that way.
another way
She's
to
walking
say
them
it?
through a particular order of argumentation, I'm thinking. And I'm only guessing at that because she and I
We
share
can
a
ask her
care
about
background.
Oh, yeah,
Mhm.
Offer five?
but it seems
To
like some of
provide
the things
an argument
are ways in
found
which
or
she wants them
revealed.
to like make specific points,
Well,
whereas
this,
the
the
other items
exegesis,
seem
it
like.
talks about what the piece argues,
Yeah.
the argument of the piece. So this piece is making
One of the
an
things that I
argument,
keep
and you
putting up
have
in the
to
cheat sheet,
provide
because
an argument.
What that's that reference?
That is
I would
really
say,
hard.
I would not
It's
use
a-
the
it's a-
argument. I would say this
Um,
paper will
but like
provide
this becomes a problem,
explanation.
like as we move through the prompt.
But
because
I
she
know
has
this
sort of
because I've
complicated
seen this
formulation of
slide. Yeah,
assignment
you have to actually
about
make
which
an
culture you're
argument, like,
supposed to pick.
Right,
two
all
is
papers make
And
an
saying
then we
argument.
lapse into a lot of these sentences,
Sometimes their papers
like,
don't make arguments.
That's one of the biggest
sentence
problems.
structure.
They'll
It's like
make
that
it
country, that
seeming
country,
more
this country,
backfish
that country.
Level.
thing, rather
Okay.
than something that.
That's
can
kind of
argue.
throw
So argument
somebody.
is
It's lots of referencing
Yeah, like,
across
Well,
the
Or what
document.
about,
The country you chose.
we're gonna have to ask him.
Underline.
You could just keep saying like your country.
When I think of doing like, I mean, equivalent of this in
The first item
communication,
is choose a
It's
country.
word.
Yeah,
It's, these
the
are the,
country you've
these are
chosen.
Yeah.
the things that are happening on the
Make
surface.
this point.
These are the things that are underneath, that they signify that they stand for.
Yeah.
But none of those words actually work.
Add for your Jack, because I don't think a lot of faculty know that much about it.
Well,
And I probably should send you the stuff. Because what he was saying, his point is that the text, it's not what the text is saying. It's like this argument that's inside of the text, yeah.
What if we break it into two sentences?
Just-
This paper should provide an argument. Should be an argument?
But if you look
Should
at the
in-
description, you can plainly see.
I don't know if I can get myself back out of that.
Yeah.
About the
so one of the things,
perspective.
so she has the grading criteria,
Let's
she just lists the
make 45
elements of
pages.
paper.
Build an argument about the chosen artifact.
So in some sense, this should be
Includes
up
these
here,
four main sections.
that is a much clearer explanation.
Ah, I like that.
Yeah,
It'll show you.
I don't
because that's what she wants them to do. She wants them to have
Yeah.
introduction and conclusion. That's effective.
Mhm.
Oh, I've totally seen this assignment,
I would probably move this
but not with not.
to the first,
Dimensions.
to the beginning.
It's gonna be a tricky.
For 45 pages, you will.
Yeah, I mean,
develop
unless
your
that's
argument.
something
Chosen
that she
artifact.
has explained to them is a component of a persuasive appeal.
Redo a prompt.
Mhm.
Sure.
Chosen artifact.
I don't know that.
period, it should include these four for these
And
four
if we're gonna
sections.
use artifact here, then
Oh,
up
up here
here,
we
we
should
should put
use-
in parentheses.
Yeah,
Where does it say?
pop culture example.
Yeah, and then.
Yeah, see,
Do you think, or should you put artifact and then parens pop culture example?
I don't know. What do you think?
I would probably put artifact.
Yeah, because that's the one you're gonna use.
It's the one he's gonna
probably
use
used it
again.
a lot in class already, but it doesn't necessarily mean they can't pick it up.
On it, yeah, because it, they skip. They don't understand what's going on, then you can mention it. Okay. So what do you think? I mean, move this to the beginning. I think moving that to the beginning makes it.
I wonder how many dimensions, because she says here that there's such a.
The question is, what does this
Here she
sentence
says
hold
we
that
have
we
to talk
need?
about each dimension, but
The
then.
arguments mentioned here,
Maybe not
this
all
is
of
this
them are
underlying
right. So, like,
perspective.
Does she have a specific number?
Is it that
she
we need to
wants
say
like writing
every-
criteria, like,
Every
so we have a minimum of having to explain 3 dimensions.
culture thing has an argument of perspective.
Yeah.
You
We gotta
need
figure out
to,
an underlying.
you need,
Like-
there's also like, there's some confusion here about this, right?
It's like there's a surface,
There's dimensions, there's
Surface
considerations, and then there's
like there's the surface level meaning and then there's the
his
underlying.
dimensions, but then it's also a web page,
Obvious.
right? So it's not immediately clear what it is that is, right? So the reference back.
the concept.
no, we just need more brains in
Now
here.
there's supposed to
We need more brains, because we've got, this paper should provide an argument
Yeah,
about
3
the
to 4
underlying
dimensions, but
political
again,
argument
it's
and
like,
perspective
you're
of a
supposed to use
single
all of
pop
them,
culture
but not all
So
of
we're
them.
thinking about
3 to 4 of
because
them,
the idea is that in
Right.
exegesis,
Yeah.
but it's not what's being explicitly said.
Yes, right.
It's
It's
what's
Right, it's the
underneath it.
hidden underneath.
But we're trying to figure if there's a more direct way to say
Say
it.
that.
Underlying.
Underlying.
Oh,
Underlying is where
Implicit.
surface. Oh, I like implicit.
I use the word implicit to talk about this. Implicit's a harder word vocabulary
So
wise,
is
so you
this-
could look it up.
one of the
I wonder
dimensions.
if both of them would be easy to look up.
That's a good question. I think underlying feels
I'm
more.
assuming because she's
Maybe I'm
using
wrong.
it as. an
Underlying
example,
seems
I guess.
metaphorical in terms of its
Yeah.
relationship to what we're thinking about, that there's a message. Underlying is a very physical word, and this is not. Implicit is a little more, it seems like a more direct concept.
I wonder if you need to put a
Not
sentence saying,
It's implied.
saying
You can
that
get
popular
them to earn
culture,
more money, but by doing more.
artifacts have both a, and like
Yeah.
obvious meaning, and then there is, and an underlying or implicit. So by putting them together, does that help? Does that make it too hard?
No, I feel that more
Earn more
explanation will
money
be good.
might have
Because you
more
have to think
success.
that when you're thinking about this
Instead of
task,
talking about
I've
my
actually seen this
investigation,
assignment,
talk
but not
about
with a non-native,
doing
and she
more
did
than
understand
vast
what it was,
and
kind of.
Should I name
Yeah,
speakers
so
have trouble
she
with
does-
this?
Yeah, this is hard. She was
sort of
having
assumes
hard
that
with
here
it, a
was
hard time with it.
wasn't-
And the thing is, in that case, yeah, well, in that case,
this is super
explaining implicit
confusing.
and
She spends
explicit
this
again is a
entire
good idea.
Paragraph
I would say
talking
so.
about
Popular culture,
one particular
Word.
culture, and she goes back to general. So it's,
She keeps saying
Have.
her phone also, this is for an upper level class.
And obvious is obvious.
maybe the depth refers to that, so they're gonna think it's, that refers
Maybe the
to
surface.
the US, right?
Obvious or surface.
So the reference is one.
As well as.
And.
Yes, colors rhetorical, but we haven't talked about that.
As well as,
Okay, so there's tools.
But, you know,
Wow.
if we haven't used it yet.
I'm pretty sure she found a paper somewhere. That's about the psychology of color. Proportions are.
You could put underlying and you could put implicit in parentheses and they can look up both of them in the
Yeah,
dictionary.
and then at least there, I mean,
There's more around
Sort of a
it.
lot of
Yeah,
going
yeah.
on.
Delete this name. Don't
Or-
choose
or-
this.
yeah.
Just choose this.
Both structurally and sentence wise.
It's like she wants
And then
to tie
you can say,
this back up
this
into
paper should
that,
provide an argument about the
Yeah.
implicit
And how do you
political
write that
argument
in your
perspective.
essay?
That
Like,
topic.
how are you-
Yeah.
Yeah, and then maybe
It's more, it definitely gets you further along.
In terms of the psychology of color. Okay, I got it. And I was like-
This is something that, like for Jack in this class, that would take a lot of thinking about, what do my students often not get in this project?
Anything
and how do I supply it to them again, even though I'm sure he's already told them.
Yeah. Okay.
But it's easy, but they'll get here and still not feel
Yeah.
comfortable with it. Yeah, I like that.
Okay. And like that becomes the first, well,
And then,
yeah, I think it goes.
It's actually way more than just
45 pages, because if they get stuck on the first sentence,
Okay.
then at least they're seeing,
Do you have anything-
okay, I've got these pages.
They're still going strong back there. I think they're still on the first paragraph.
I know, that's 'cause this is not the underlying political argument is a difficult, it's a very, it's abstract concept, which then you've explained it for sure in class. So
Yeah, we actually do like activities in class where I show them like silent Pixar movies and
Yeah,
ask them to tell me what it's about,
yeah,
right? And
Yeah.
they have to they have to look at how it's been organized and why
Yeah.
things are related the way they are, and that makes a point, right?
yeah.
Yeah, there's like an entire lecture that I give before they even
Really?
see that about like what an exegesis is, and they actually try it a couple
But it's
times.
possible that they get to this point and they need to be reminded. That's
Mhm.
very common, especially if it's not your native language, so the lecture may or may not have had full impact.
Mhm.
Yeah, so then we were thinking like, what did we say to explain it again, even though we know you've already explained it?
They're joining us in about 50 seconds, so.
Okay.
So we define it.
To
So just
read
be
without
clear, you
first
guys are already all
paragraphs,
talking.
it's not fair, we have to put a paragraph.
In the textbook style,
Just leave
you
the water
can
in
put
it,
the
that's fine.
definition off to the side and the design,
That's a
right?
good idea.
That's cool.
We were thinking of something like popular culture works have an obvious surface meaning, and we know this has already been explained in class, but we're repeating it, and an underlying implicit meaning, and then like reminding them again.
Mhm.
Or maybe even instead of meaning, it should be argument.
Argument, yeah, because it is the
The
argument.
argument that you're really looking for.
Mhm. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah,
You could bold the word, the definition on the side, and then if there's like a
Yeah.
page in the textbook that refers to that concept, you can
Ooh.
even put that
That's cool.
as a reference there.
for this class.
That's all right. No,
But yeah,
you don't
no,
have
but
to.
the provision of the
But-
definition is good.
yeah, and because it's often, if it's
Yes.
an abstract concept, you may have got it.
Hey,
and
all.
then
I
2
think you
days
guys should
later
be back
have
with us,
forgotten
yes?
And not be able to hold on to it so
Here
tightly.
we are.
Yay, welcome
So
back.
useful.
Okay, so what we're gonna do now is just sort of talk about like what kinds of things were you able to change? What did you see? What happened when you looked at other people's prompts?
It's kind of hard.
Crickets.
You don't have the meaning that they have in your head.
Mhm.
Yeah,
So,
I
So-
think when you're working with your own prompt, you know you can ask yourself, what do I need them to know? Whereas we're not familiar with the assignment, so it was harder for us to come up with.
Mhm.
yeah, we haven't had the lecture.
We didn't see it.
I'm like thinking about my TV criticism class, thinking, oh, okay, wait.
We don't have the
Yeah.
content knowledge
Yeah.
that the
Mhm.
students would have had that instruction.
So,
But I
yeah.
mean, that's a good
Yeah.
point, because I can't assume that after one lecture, they're gonna be able to recall all of that. So that's a fair point, right?
You can assume that many of them won't.
Mhm.
And you can assume that definitely your non-native speakers after one lecture, there's some of them that you can assume that they will not be able to recall, for sure.
Mhm.
I think, do you think Amy
Or
has a
just
fair?
bits of it, but maybe
Yeah.
not that
maybe not.
piece.
Not the
Yeah.
piece that you needed them to.
Okay.
Yeah, and we were working with exegesis, did I say that right?
Yes.
Damn it. And because it's an abstract concept, you could also assume would be difficult to hold on to. And so then again, worth repeating the actual thing in the prompt. Go ahead.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's fine. No, I said, I like the way you broke it down by with the labels, with the, by the sections.
Mhm.
I like that.
That's good document design, Jack.
Yeah.
I know, I was sitting going, oh.
Yeah. This is multiple pages, oh my god. That's so much.
Austin, so I have Austin as one of her kiddos as a writing fellow, and he's like, oh my God, Laura. He didn't say it that way, but I can read it in his face. It was much more tactful than that. He's like, oh, do some bullet points. This is going to be, because usually I just do long paragraphs. And he's like, do some bullet points. This is going to overwhelm people. So I tried to put it in bullet points, and then, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I mean, that was actually-
okay.
Well, what we noticed was that like in your prompt, there seems to be two things that you're trying to do, and that those two things are sort of rolled up together in these bullet points.
Yeah.
In the sense there's content from the course I want you to apply, and then there's a series of things I want you to do. And it's not immediately clear to us when we were looking at it how those two things relate, and then whether or not you actually want a 5-paragraph essay that follows this format, or if these are a series of things you want them to synthetically do in the text. So like that was, and what ends up happening is that with that lack of sort of structure related to the paper, you end up in the course of writing them, there's a ton of referencing, right? Back and forth across sentences and then across the document. And it even gets kind of confusing, right? So it's like, so there's a lot of that, right? So I think the perfect example is between like this point and this point. You spend most of the time talking about the United States, and then you say, fourth, describe how you would your persuasive appeals to that culture.
Yeah, which culture?
So is it the US culture, these other cultures, right? And that I think has a lot to do with the structure, right? The structure, we'll clarify that a little bit.
It's a good example of that referencing.
That
Native speakers
does that
onto non-native speakers.
And does that student know what the that is?
Mm-hmm. That was one of the things we noticed. And then the other thing was like Hofstede.
Yeah.
The proud academic tradition of murdering people's last names.
Hofstede. How do you say it?
I always heard Hofstede.
You always fight about it, and then you go to a conference and you meet the person. It's like a third language.
Oh no. The accent's on the first one.
Robert Keohane is R1 and I are. Anyway, but like he has dimensions, and he has a website, and he has qualities, and he has considerations. Like Hofstede has a ton of stuff.
Yeah.
It's not immediately clear kind of what in each situation what you're referring to. That was one of the things I think those were.
And is there like a minimum dimensions that you're expecting them to address? Because it seems like there's multiple dimensions, but at one point it says, but they've not all been discussed. And so I'm like, wait, how many do I have to include?
You say all of them, and then you have a contingent phrase where you're like, the ones we've discussed, and then you have another phrase that says 3 to 4. So it's like, is it all of them? Is it 3 to 4? Is it just the ones we've discussed? Anything else?
Those of you who are online, what did you guys see or talk about?
This is Glenn. So one thing that Jack said reminded me of something Kathy and I talked about, which was we appreciated, Amy, in your sample that you outline the goal or the purpose of the assignment, and that's even outside the context of international students. I recently started putting goal or purpose on every assignment to tell students like why I was asking them to do this, like what the point was, but also to force me to articulate that. And I realized, oh yeah, definitely some things I was assigning really was no clear purpose. So, like there was no reason to do that. And so that was one thing we talked about.
Glenn, can you say that last bit again? I'm sorry, I think you dropped out and I missed what you said.
Oh, sorry. We were basically saying that you don't always explain kind of the reason why we ask students to do the assignments, and so putting that on the assignment sheet is a good way to show them that. And also, it's a good practice to sort of force yourself to have to articulate why I'm assigning this to my students. I found that like there were certain assignments that I was assigning, it really had no clear focus. It was just
the part I missed, I think. I think that's an interesting point, is that you had to clarify even for yourself that maybe I assigned something that was not clearly purposeful, right? You're like, why did I do this?
Well, I think.
Well, what am I hoping students will learn out of this?
Yeah.
Yeah, I should note that the reason why I do that, like all of my assignment sheets have a purpose or a rationale, is because when I worked in a writing center, students would come and say, I have no idea why I'm supposed to do this.
Right, yeah.
Like, it's really clear to me that I have to do it, and this is why but I have no idea why it seems stupid. Like, I have to try to glean from the assignment sheet why this is important. So, I mean, that's, because we all think this stuff is vastly important. Like,
Yeah.
of course it is. It's
Or
awesome.
that they're gonna pick up from context what
Or
the purpose
exegesis.
was, but
Yeah.
of course they don't necessarily.
So I have a question
Uh-huh.
then. So my assignment is to write a paper discussing Hofstede's cultural dimensions, which is like, US is an individualist culture, so it's all about me, and there are collectivist cultures that are more like China and Latin American that are more about the group, the good of the group kind of thing. And so there's several different, there's like not 8 dimensions. And then so I have them write this paper where they pick a country and they're trying to develop persuasive appeals to aim at that culture. So in the US, you might appeal to our individualist sense and, this is all about making money for myself.
Yeah.
But in a collectivist, you'd say more, this is going to help your family or your family, your town, your community kind of thing. And so then they actually have to give a speech, and the class then pretends they're from that culture.
Oh, see, I thought this was a paper.
This is a paper, but then they have to give a speech based on this.
Okay.
So is the paper, for me, the paper was the way to work through that mentally.
Mhm.
Does that make sense to the group?
Yeah.
Or
The purpose of the paper is yeah.
But I think you need to say that explicitly,
You
right?
gotta
Like
write
I try to do that, where it's like, one of the things you have to learn in this
Yeah.
course is how to phrase your argument to different cultures and meet them along these dimensions.
Strengthen your skills.
You're going to do 3 things along that trajectory in this class, A, B, and C. This paper sits here, right?
Say that slower. I can't write all that down that fast.
But it's like it starts to belabor the accu-horse that all of us are burdened with.
Yeah.
We burden it. I don't know. Metaphors are all messed up. It's late today. But it's like you just specify, like, this is what you're doing in the course. You're learning how to phrase things to appeal to different cultures. You've been given Hofstede's dimensions to do that. So to develop this skill in the course, you're going to do A, B, and C. You're going to learn him. You're going to do this paper, and you're going to give a speech. This assignment is the working through of your ideas for the speech.
Yeah.
It's applying his
Yeah.
dimensions
Yeah, this paper
to.
gives you practice.
And I think just even pointing out in the document that the point of the essay is actually to prepare you
For
to
the later.
then write the
Yeah.
speech. Right?
Mm-hmm.
So,
Because the first year I taught that class, I gave that assignment. It blew me away at the end of the semester, where I could see in the students their skills, right? Like I could see them have practiced it and be able to do it for the final paper. But if I asked them at the end of class, like, oh yeah, that pop culture thing was really cool, but I don't know why you made us do it. And it's like,
Yeah.
like I see it, like you did. Like, so when you tell them it's a methods exercise that relates to another assignment, then they have a better understanding of what it is you're supposed to be doing, right? Don't just write me out 5 paragraphs about why Buffy is awesome. Like,
But I do think it's important, I don't know, just to think about again, document design. If you would do purpose or task first, only because the purpose of what?
yeah.
For me personally, I want to know what I'm doing, and then you can tell me what the purpose of the thing I'm doing, but if you're explaining the purpose of the thing I'm doing before the thing I'm doing, it's a good question to think about as you're reading it.
Yeah.
Will it help them to know what they're doing before I tell them why they're doing it? I'm not sure. That'd be something to.
I know, and I think it was super hard for me to not put the purpose first, because I feel like, well, the task doesn't make sense actually if you don't understand what we're trying to achieve. So I always want to put the purpose first. But this is why Zephra and I hit upon this middle ground of pulling the key task items up to the left, which still let me introduce the task with the purpose, but also highlight the key task stuff too. So that was a good compromise, I feel like.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, and then it reinforces, right? So they're probably looking at this stuff along the left because it's short, right? And then, I don't know, it seems like it kind of reinforces. They reinforce each other.
Well, the purpose is kind of like why you're doing this thing, but then the stuff along the side is what you actually need to do.
Here's what you have
Your
to do.
action items.
Hey, Glenn and Kathy, what else did you guys talk about? Or did you have something else you wanted to add?
Kathy, do you want to take this one? Well, we talked about a lot of different assignment prompts. I was going through what I shared and trying to highlight some language that maybe idiomatic or maybe metaphorical, and I'm sort of wondering where the line is in some ways. Like I found hot button issues as part of a list. Hot button issues, topics, or concerns. And I wonder if that's idiomatic. Probably that can be corrected or changed. But something like crafting, and this is like having gone to creative writing school using verbs like crafting. But I'm wondering how difficult that is for international students. I guess what I mean literally right.
I think a good place to go with that, Glenn, is to ask yourself, when you're making those language choices, does this choice make a difference?
Right.
If I said right, am I losing something? Is there something in craft that I want them to pull out? If the answer to that was no, then I would say definitely use right. If the answer to that was yes, then I might say, now craft is a tricky one because craft has all kinds of connotations. Yeah. What was it in craft that you like? So was it carefully right, or I don't know.
Artfully.
I'm
guessing creative writing
is probably not.
Well, and if craft is something that you've been talking about prior to this assignment in a particular context, and you want them to have an appreciation for crafting things, and that's something that they already are accustomed to hearing, and they already know what you mean by that, then that's probably okay. But yeah, it can be just simply stated as right.
Right. I mean, that's not something that I was thinking about early on in this presentation with the phrase fit together.
What was the phrase again?
Fit together.
Together.
Yeah.
Because I think that one of the ways that we often try to represent abstract concepts in some kind of physical space, fitting them together. And so I would imagine in a certain context, if you're talking about this stuff a lot, that's actually a very meaningful phrase. Or it could be a very meaningful phrase on an assignment prompt, because turning abstraction into concrete things in that way is a way of helping students access that stuff.
Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, you go ahead.
Oh, it's like the problem I have with exegesis. Like exegesis is this big like $100 word that refers to like a really specific kind of analysis. Analysis doesn't quite work, because then I'll just get a discussion of whether, Pretty in Pink ended well or not. Rather than, choosing kids and then putting them at prom time, and like the underlying decisions about the organization of the text having their own meaning, right? I think Glenn's point about craft is right, because writing just means writing. It just means the actual mechanical process of transforming words onto something that persists on paper, right? That's what writing means. Whereas by craft, you're trying to say, no, like the decisions you make about what ideas, how to equate them, how to organize them. I think I like the point about trying to make that as structural as possible, right? To try to equate that meaning. Because people in English, and this is something as like I struggled with as a kid, as a dyslexic, and then I see talking to all my in-laws who are all Polish, like we rely on these so imprecise, weird concepts that we all just sort of know how they work, and other people just don't. They look at you and go, what? That doesn't make any sense.
The funniest look I ever got from somebody actually was in an international student, and I asked the question, what's your pet peeve?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Oh my God. It was a heavily international student class. Like I didn't have enough Americans.
What's a peeve?
Exactly. Something out of Harry Potter, right? Like like that. In that instance, I was like, oh, wow, I need to think more about how I say things.
Mhm.
Like that, that was one of those moments where,
Yeah.
What are the things that annoy you?
And maybe that's why it's
This
really
word.
good to have this idea of what you want them to do. Boil it down to the essentials. Take out all the fluff and the fun.
Mhm.
Put it somewhere easy. And then if you feel like you want to have a little bit more creativity and fun, then you can, but at least you know that the essential won't be lost.
Mhm.
Because it can easily be lost. These word choices we're making are often lost.
Well, it goes back to the purpose too. Like, is your purpose to have them write something, or is your purpose to have them craft something, right? And so, you know, if it's craft, then they should know what that word means if that's what you're asking them to do at this point in an assignment like this, so.
And I think for technical language like this, like a word like craft does mean something specific to creative writers. I think it's really helpful to take Zephra's suggestion, just make a glossary, right?
Yeah.
When I teach like analytical writing to my first year students, I actually do definitional slides and say, okay, we're going to talk about how you link evidence and claims. But what do I mean by evidence and claims? Because I know you don't mean what I mean when I say evidence, okay? And so I actually just have some definitions. Here's what I mean by claim. It's an assertion that you will make about the evidence. What is evidence, right? And I'll define that for them so that we're using the same language.
Right. Native students even appreciate that in
Yeah.
the context of your subject.
Absolutely.
And there's lots of these technical words, even across disciplines, that we don't use the same way. I think analysis is a great word
Yeah.
to show the gaps between disciplines in terms of what we mean, because you said, well, analysis is too broad because I'll get this evaluation or whatever. That's not what I mean.
Mhm.
I mean this specific process of analysis. But we forget that the way we do analysis isn't the way we all do analysis.
Yeah.
And so we don't explain to them, what do I mean by analysis, right?
I think that actually speaks to the value added of, like, I think that unfortunately a lot of, it doesn't apply to anybody here because we're here, but like a lot of, the point will make sense in a second. A lot of instructors tend to think about ESL students or international students as an add-on to their practice, in the sense that I have students and then I have this small set of other students that I have to make certain concessions to. And that shouldn't be the way it's thought about, right? Because one of the things that I deal with every semester, and I'm guilty of it, every academic is guilty of it, we preach clarity and concision and then we don't write that way. Academic writing is awful. Like, they're exposed to awful writing and we preach clarity and concision. And I get at least one student in every class that tries to sound like an academic and drags their grade down because I don't understand what they're saying. And I get them in my office and I say, in class you get it, but I literally don't know what this means. And they say, well, I thought that's what I had to sound like. Reflecting that in their assignment sheets, like, this is stuff that you can beat out of your own students if you're aware of it on your own, or maybe even your own writing.
Yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, you could turn this lens right back on academic writing. Maybe we could make it more accessible also.
Stop the
This
madness.
is actually something, I aspire to that style. In fact, the best
Yeah.
feedback I ever got in an article was that it was accessible to an outside audience. And I'm like, good, I'm going for accessibility. But something else you said, I just wanted to comment, this notion that we design the class for, like, with international students in mind. This is similar to the argument that's made about disability accommodations as well, because people think of disabilities that it's an add-on, we make an accommodation or whatever, whereas the principle of universal design asks us to think about designing for all of our students at once. And the upside both to universal design and to rethinking in this way is really these things help not only the disabled students with disabilities or the ESL students, but actually they're design principles that help all of them.
Yes.
Anyway, so rethinking actually does help all your students.
I mean, what student wouldn't appreciate this over
Yeah.
this? You know, like, even a native speaker is like, this looks much easier to look at.
Because the thing that always happens, and I've seen it in every school and I saw it amongst my friends in undergraduate, the funny part is that international students and ESL students who are properly, like, met are usually the best writers by the time they get to the end of their program, because they're very aware of all this.
where native speakers just get away with their instincts, which is how most of us write. Most of us don't remember formal English grammar. Of course, some of you do. That's your job.
Yeah, we didn't
But like
remember.
most of us, it's just like
you don't
it
think
falls
about it when
into
you're
just
writing.
tacit
Yeah.
knowledge, right? And you'll do things like references that don't make sense because
There's reasons why non-native speakers outperform their
Yeah.
native speaking peers. There's a
Eventually.
whole body of research around
yeah,
all of
yeah,
it.
because it's all conscious to
And
them.
it's-
Like they've
had to use metacognitive skills to transfer
Which you never
all
have
of
to
that
as a
stuff.
native
And
speaker.
so, right.
Yeah.
So they end up, once they become proficient, they will outperform always,
And Amy and I, because we presented this at C's at the composition conference, we've also got some handouts that explain it very quickly and clearly. So if anybody feels like this is something they would want to be able to share.
Yep, and that handout is in your Google Doc.
The Google Docs.
That Zephra and I just designed that for a much shorter version of this presentation for the new teacher-to-teacher feature at C's, which is sort of like speed dating for teaching. And you get like 7 minutes to give your teaching idea, a handout, and then you move on.
Wow.
It's kind of cool, actually. So the handout that's in there was designed to have some pretty clear examples and to show the basic points that we just went over in a quick handout. And we would invite you to share that with other people in your department.
Yeah.
Don't, it's yours to share. If you want to show this to other people, please feel free to do that.
I'm definitely going to tweet out your.
Thank you. Yeah, you can tweet us if you want. It's 4 o'clock, so this kind of brings us to the end of our time. I just want to do a quick reminder. Are we still showing this? Yes. Okay. Just making sure we're still seeing the screen.
No,
We're not. We're not? No.
Sorry, guys, we screwed something up.
It says share screen, or I'm not. I need to share the screen. Okay, got it.
Oh, there we go.
I'm just going to share this last
I need to have a
thing here.
think through this before I say anything about it on the paper.
I just want to publicize our last workshop. This was a 3-part series. Jack, surely you're going to come for the 3rd one because you've been in for 2 already.
I better.
If you don't come for the 3.
I got leverage now.
Oh, someone in the chat.
Someone in the chat said something. Okay, so this is the information for the next one. The only thing you need to know is we're working on changing this location. 461 had a broken camera, and so we moved to the underground. I think Jamie's going to work to get us in Norrington, so we can be above ground for the 3rd one. So it's already changed, so we're in Norrington next time.
Oh, cool.
Right? Great. Come up and join us. I always have snacks on hand. Bring a friend with you. Drag someone over out of their office or whatever. This last piece is on giving feedback. So, and this is really a critical piece because I think a lot of our international students really struggle to work with the feedback we give them sometimes, and are sometimes, I think, afraid to tell us. So we're going to give you some concrete strategies for how you can work with feedback in a way that will actually help them make revisions, because that's what we want them to do, right? Jamie, did you have something you wanted to follow up with? Oh, after this concludes, if you would not mind going out to innovatepark.org, and there is a survey for this session. Would you mind filling it out for us, please? Because we report the data back out at the end of the year, so we would love to have your feedback. And of course, you can always tell me what other topics that you would like us to do park rights workshops on. I haven't planned most of them for next year, so if there's like a particular hot button topic, important issue that you want to, like it, that if you want us to cover next year in our programming, please let us know, and I can work that in. We do 4 to 6 workshops a year, depending on what resources I have and how much time we've got. So we're happy to do anything you need. Okay. Thanks so much for coming today. Thanks for attending online and being a group.
And Glenn and Kathy, come right tomorrow.
Yeah.
The retrospective has started.
I'll be there.
I can only come for 2 hours, then I have another meeting, so.
Park Rights is providing food. Do you guys, are you okay with bagels in the morning?
Well, They're gluten.
Are they everything bagels?
I can get everything bagels.
I was gonna say, isn't that like the base food group for academics is bagels and coffee?
You can